Good evening. I'm Dr. Patrick Lewis. I'm the president and CEO here at the Filson Historical Society. Thank you for joining us for tonight for this event, held in conjunction with Tales and Trails, the National Genealogical Society Family History Conference. Thank you all for being here tonight. In our very uncertain times, the act of showing up is one of the greatest civic contributions that we all can make. To all of you, my deepest thanks for coming here and creating a community of learning and reflection with one another. I hope to see you at future events where we can elevate and celebrate meaningful civic discourse together. Our speaker this evening, Charles Holman, is an East Coast civil rights attorney and genealogist with over 50 years of experience. Recognized by Chief Genetic Genealogist of C.C. Moore of Finding Your Roots as a pioneer among Black Americans researching their family ties before the Civil War. Charles is a member of the National Genealogical Society, the Sons and Daughters of the Middle Passage, and the Sons of the American Revolution. He is also a fellow of the Michigan State Bar Foundation and a life member of the NAACP, where he served on the National Board of Directors. Please join me in welcoming Charles Holman.
Well, thank you for that very nice introduction. And I just want to say to all of you, it is a pleasure to be here in Kentucky tonight. I have roots in this state going back to the 1770s, and every time I come here, I feel like I'm back home. And the thing about it is, I'm not from Kentucky, and I've only visited here several times through the decades, but it is home to me. And by extension, all of you who are here tonight, who share an interest in history, you are like family to me. Because not everyone understands how important history is, how it shapes our lives, how it informs us of who we are and the times in which we live. It's one of the most valuable things we have, and people need to be like all of you, interested in that history. And one of the greatest resources that you have right here in Louisville is the Filson Society. And it is a place that I will always be grateful to, because this is the place that gave me something special in my research. The archives here are unparalleled. The staff here is welcoming and helpful. And like I said, the discoveries that I made here exceeded my wildest imagination. So I want to say to the Filson Society, thank you for honoring truth. Thank you for opening history to all of us so that we can enjoy and so that we can learn more and more about what it means to be Americans and how special this place is that we call home. I also want to give a special thanks to Ms. Hannah Costell. Is she here tonight? Well, she's a staff person from the Filson. And when you come here to do research, look for her. And I say that because she is really good. And she goes above and beyond what we might expect when we come to do research. She is the one that helped me to find records that really helped me put everything together. And I just wanted to give her that shout out. What started me on my genealogy voyage was my father. When I was a child and every night before I went to bed, he would read me stories or he would tell me stories. And he was a really good storyteller. That's him right there. He's been gone since 2009. But I think about him every day. And one night, when he was putting me to bed, he told me a story about his mother, my grandmother. And he told me about her grandparents who were originally from Kentucky. Now, my grandmother was a Canadian. And she was a Canadian because her family originally had come from Kentucky, but escaped slavery and ended up in Canada. But because of her skin color and her appearance, she was someone that a lot of people were fooled by. They looked at her, they thought she was white, she wasn't white. And even in the early days of her marriage to my grandfather, they faced threats from the Ku Klux Klan, who thought this was an interracial marriage. It wasn't. And my grandmother had a heritage that she was proud to share. And she let people know that she was Black. But there's a parallel between her and her grandmother. Her grandmother had a similar appearance. And for her grandmother, it meant the difference between being enslaved and being able to escape. Now, her grandmother passed down stories about the escape from slavery in Kentucky to Canada, and those stories are passed on to my grandmother. She passed them on to my father. He passed them on to me. And the story was that Grandma's grandparents were two young enslaved people in Louisville. They were enslaved by different enslavers, and they wanted to be together, but it was difficult because different people enslaved them. So they began to think about getting away and being free so they could be together. With the help of Quakers that were here in the Louisville area, they were assisted in putting together a plan. And in 1854, the Quakers arranged to have a boatman take them across the Ohio River. And then they also dressed America in a way that capitalized on her appearance. They dressed her as a white widow in mourning. They put a black dress on her. They put a heavy veil over her face, passed her off as a white woman, put her on a train to the north. But my great-great-grandfather Anderson couldn't do that. He was a mixed-race person, and it was obvious to anyone looking at him that he was not white. So the Quakers told him to instead walk from Kentucky to Canada, but they gave him places where he could stop during the trip for refreshment and to rest. He did so, and both of them successfully made it to Canada. But once in Canada, they didn't just stay. They decided they would return to Kentucky many times to help rescue other people who were still enslaved. And their missions continued for several years until the rewards for my great-great-grandmother America's capture became too great. Then they had to discontinue it. I tried to research that story, and it's very difficult to research the Underground Railroad because it was clandestine. But we did find one newspaper article that looks as though it's talking about great-great-grandfather Anderson. And it talks about how he was kidnapped once he came back to the United States and was sold into slavery, but he escaped again. And on the Underground Railroad, he was accompanied by two other former enslaved people, and they all successfully made it to Canada. We can't say for sure that's about him, but that's the closest we've been able to come. Well, those are just the basics of my grandmother's story. And as a young child, there was only so much that my father could tell me or that his mother would tell him when he was young. And so the questions remained to me, did they leave family behind when they left Louisville for freedom? And who were the people that they were escaping from? Nobody could answer those questions. No one seemed to know. So I began to look for answers. And these are some of the record sources that I consulted to find the answers to those questions and others. These are things that I think most genealogists are very familiar with because these are the things that hold the answers. Census records, death records, cemetery records, marriage records, state and court records, which are very important when it comes to enslaved people because they were regarded as property and they were regarded as the most valuable property that enslavers had. So more than often, they will be found in estate and court records. Pension records. Kentucky had a lot of black men who during the Civil War joined the Union Army. And a lot of those men filed for pensions when the war was over. And those records are available to us. And those records read like biographies of these people's lives. They tell us from birth to death, in many cases, the life of these people and what they endured before the service, what they endured during the Civil War as soldiers, and their lives afterwards. Those records are phenomenal. Another source is the Freedmen's Bureau, which was a federal agency that was started after the Civil War. Newspapers are very helpful. Tax records are extremely helpful because people were taxed on the number of people they enslaved. Church records, baptismal records, very valuable. Family members who are still living are very helpful. And lastly, historical societies and archives like this place. Can't overlook that. Well, in looking through these records, I started by looking for the oldest people in my family. And years ago, back in the early 1970s, there was a man who became very famous later on. His name was Alex Haley. And he came to the town where I lived, spoke at a lecture that the school district sponsored, and he told me, and I never forgot it, he said, the first thing you do is seek out the oldest living people in your family, because they will know a great deal, hopefully, and when they're gone, you may never find it again. So interestingly, one of the oldest people in the family turned out to be a 105-year-old former school teacher in Washington, D.C. Her name was Margie. She was my grandmother's first cousin once removed. And the way I found her was years later when we started doing DNA testing. There was a young lady in suburban Washington, D.C. who matched my family, matched our DNA, and I could tell from the people who I had tested exactly what side of the family she was from. So I reached out to her and I told her, you're related to me through my ancestors, Anderson in America. They were enslaved in Kentucky. They escaped to Canada, et cetera, et cetera. Well, she hadn't heard anything about it. It was news to her. But she was interested enough that she went to her great-grandmother, Margie. And Margie said, oh, yes. And she said, what's more, I even have a picture of that man's grandparents when they came to visit me in the early 1960s. Well, Margie gave me something I'd never had before, never dreamed I'd see. And that was a picture of Anderson, the ancestor who escaped from slavery in Kentucky. Apparently, Margie's grandmother, Sarah, had this picture of her father, and when she moved from Canada to Washington, D.C. in the 1880s, she brought it with her. Had I not met Margie, I never would have seen that photo. And when they tell you that a picture is worth 1,000 years, I mean 1,000 words, that is indeed so. The other elderly relative who helped me was a lady named Mattie, and we called her Aunt Mattie, even though she was just a relative by marriage. And her father-in-law was the son of Anderson, the enslaved person that escaped. And Mattie, or Aunt Mattie, was from Mississippi, and to hear about the Underground Railroad and African Americans in Canada was something very interesting to her and something she hadn't grown up with. So she listened to the stories her father-in-law told, and she remembered them. And I went to a family reunion, and I was a young lawyer then. I thought I knew everything. And I was telling the family the story as I'd heard it about Anderson and America. And when I finished talking, Aunt Mattie came over to me, with her kind of unsteady gait and her cane, and she reached me and she put her hand on my wrist. And she said, "I know all about that story." Then she began to tell me things about Anderson and America that I had never heard. She told me that America had had a son by her last enslaver, a guy whose name was Pendergrass. He lived right here in Louisville. And she said the reason that Anderson and America kept coming back to Kentucky after they were free in Canada was they were trying to rescue that son. That when America escaped, she was forced to leave the child behind. And once she got to Canada, she couldn't live without that child. So she risked life and limb to come back to Louisville over and over, hoping to find this child. But unfortunately, she never found the child, at least not in those years. The family believed that Pendergrass had either sold the child or moved him precisely to keep her from getting the child and to punish her from running away. When I heard the story and began to process it, I felt a great sense of loss and grief because, like most people, I take my freedom for granted. I don't think in terms of being enslaved and limited in terms of what I can do and where I can go. I don't think like that. I know about it, but when I thought about America and giving up her child to be free, I grieved. So I sought out her grave in Canada, and this is her tombstone. And as I gazed at that grave, suddenly I just felt peace. And I couldn't understand, why am I feeling peace when I know what happened? But years later, it would all make sense. The lost son that America left behind apparently was moved from Louisville to Chattanooga, hundreds of miles away from here. So that's why his mother couldn't find him. And when he was older, he joined the Union Army. He was captured, but he managed to escape. After the war, he made his way back to Louisville and found his mother's family, but of course not his mother because she was living in Canada. Reunited with his mother's family in Louisville, he was adopted by her sister, Lucinda, and he became one of the first Black teachers here in Louisville. He had the distinction of being part of a Union group of soldiers where the men in charge of the soldiers thought it was important to teach the former slaves to read and to write. So when he came back to Louisville, he was valuable. And the organization that I told you about, the Freedmen's Bureau, they were funding schools for the newly freed people, and he became one of the teachers in that school. But as time went on, eventually he was reunited with America, his birth mother in Canada, and eventually he moved to Colorado, where he became a rancher and a justice of the peace. And interestingly enough, he moved into the white population. So he lived the first part of his life as a Black man, second part of his life as a white man. That only whet my appetite. I was like, I must know more about these people. So as a result of pension records and one of America's brothers having been a Civil War soldier, it led me to the names of the people that had enslaved America here in Kentucky, in Bullitt County, just outside of Lexington. It was the family of Joseph A. Brooks. And apparently Brooks had done what a lot of slaveholders did. He would hire out the slaves that he didn't need to work on his farm or plantation. And he either did that or sold America, but she ended up with Pendergrass. But when Joseph Brooks died and accounting was made of his estate, let me go back one slide. And there she is, America, age 13, and a value given to her. And then a few lines down, there's her sister Lucinda and a value given to her. And on the next page, their father is listed. So you can see how these estate records are very, very valuable when we do this kind of work. Well, now that I had a slaveholder's name, my desire was, let me find out more about this man. And I began to search for descendants of Joseph A. Brooks, who might be here in Kentucky. And lo and behold, they were still here. And one of the relatives put me in touch with Michael Robeson, who's sitting there. Michael, can you wave to the crowd? And let me tell you, this gentleman went way above the call of duty. When he heard I was interested, he dropped everything to help me. And he told me my grandmother left a chest full of papers. And in that chest were records of some of the enslaved people. And if you want, I will send you a CD of those records so you can look at them and find your people. Now, he didn't have to do that. And some people wouldn't have done it because they would have been afraid, okay, what's this man want? Does he want reparations or does he want vengeance? No, I don't want any of those things. And I've known Michael now for 8 years, and he can tell you that that's not what this is about. This is about me as a child, learning about my roots from my father and wanting to know more. And you know, my dad used to say that as you go through life, and he always called him the good Lord, puts people in your path who will help you. And you only have to be open to them to receive the blessing. And man, did this guy ever bless me. One of the things he gave me was a document which was an 1817 bill of sale from when the Brooks family purchased the enslavement of my ancestor America's father. And this is a copy of it. It was valuable to me because not only did it name him, but it named the people that sold him, which opened up additional areas to research. Valuable, valuable paper. But then, those of you that know Michael won't be surprised by this, but he invited me to come to the farm or plantation that his family still owned here in Kentucky to see it, to see the house where the enslavers lived, to see the cabins where the enslaved people were, and there's only one still there. And man, I tell you, I couldn't get on a plane fast. I came out to Kentucky and I was a little bit apprehensive because, you know, my ancestor America had escaped and, you know, you're kind of coming into the unknown. You don't know what to expect. But Michael had been so gracious and so warm that I only had to expect I would see more of it, and I did. He gave me a tour of the complete farm and gave me a chance to see that last remaining slave cabin, built in brick, one door, one window in the back, small place, attic. And he gave me a chance to not only touch the walls, but to hear the silences. And I don't think anybody there with me appreciated what was happening to me at that time, what was going through my mind, and just trying to put my arms around all this. Because as a child, I'd never dreamed that I'd get to see something like that. My people. It was a spiritual and emotional epiphany that I will never forget. Turning now from the story of America to the story of Anderson, my great-great-grandfather, learning about him was different. I learned that after my great-great-grandmother died, Anderson remarried. And when he went to apply for a marriage record, he had to fill out an application. And in this particular part of Canada, they made you give the names of your parents on your marriage record, marriage license application. He named his parents, Robert and Winnie Thomas, taking me back another generation. And then this Freedmen's Bureau that I mentioned before, they had a bank. And Anderson had a sibling that had an account at that bank. And in her records, she again named the same people as her parents. And she named him. So now I've got the parents and I've got a sibling, people that none of the family knew about. The next big breakthrough came through DNA when I matched with a lady that lived in California. Her name was Diana. And I had DNA tested a number of my relatives already, so I could see that Diana was matching up with my family on the side of the family that was related to Anderson and America, just like the other lady that I mentioned to you. And Diana, this lady in California, had a family tree attached to her DNA results, and she had an ancestor named Susan who was from Kentucky. But the last name didn't match up with anybody in my family. So again, I thought, okay, put on your research cap, see what you can find out about Susan. I found out that Susan had been married to a Black Civil War soldier and that she'd received a Civil War widow's pension. And even though COVID was going on, the National Archives were closed, I had a real good friend who another friend of mine here knows very well. And she had connections with the archives. And she said, I'll get you those records. She did. And those records blew my mind. This is the record from Ancestry.com that told me about the pension. This is a page from the pension records of Susan. And it told all about her life as an enslaved person and afterwards. And she mentioned in this record her parents' names, Robert Thomas, and her mother was Winnie Thomas. Same names as my great-great-grandparents. The DNA was not lying. It told me how she was connected, and this record confirmed it. But it went even further than that. She named the people that enslaved her and her parents and her siblings, and she said they lived near Louisville, out in the country in Jefferson County, and she gave their names. So that gave me another thing to look at. Let me find out more about these people who were the enslavers of Anderson. And as I began to search for them, I thought, it's time to go back to Kentucky. Maybe if you go to that courthouse in Louisville, they'll be able to tell you more about this Forey family, and in particular, the Forey gentleman who's named in this document, and his sister, whose name was Miss Holliday. She started off as a Forey. She married someone named John J. Holliday, and her name was Lucretia. Susan told about her life in this document. She said that she was taken from Kentucky to Missouri when she was 5 years old. And it was common to split up enslaved families when the slaveholder died. And that's what happened to her. She was taken to Missouri, and unfortunately at that point, she never again saw her mother or her siblings. Once in Missouri, she married and had children, but eventually her enslavers decided to sell her and her husband. And all this was happening just as the Civil War was about to begin. A few years later, her husband escaped from slavery and joined the Union Army, leaving Susan behind. And then another event happened which was crushing in Susan's life and which changed the course of her life. After her husband had joined the army, the people that enslaved her decided to run from the Union Army and to flee to Texas. And when they went to Texas, they took Susan with them. As a result, Susan never saw her husband again. And after the war, she wrote back to Missouri asking if anybody knew what happened to her husband. And she was told he died. In reality, what had happened is he'd been shot several times and was convalescing in Texas, where he had been sent. So they were in the same state. But if anybody knows anything about Texas, it's a huge state. He was in Brownsville on the Mexican border, and she was in a place called Marshall in East Texas, close to Louisiana. So she thought her husband died. And she and her brother James decided to leave Texas, Marshall, Texas, and walk to the next biggest city, which was, I believe, Shreveport, Louisiana. Meanwhile, her husband got well, and he wrote to people in Texas asking if they'd seen his wife. They didn't know where she'd gone. So the two of them never were reunited. In time, she healed, she married again, and she had a new set of children. Lo and behold, her first husband, he'd been wounded. So when he became elderly, he filed for a Civil War pension. And in those pension records was a picture of him in uniform that I'm sure his wife never saw. So we can see him, but sadly, Susan never did. I followed up also on the clue that Susan gave about the Forey family that had enslaved her and family here in Kentucky. And I was surprised that their name was Forey and not Thomas, which was the maiden name of Susan and the surname of my great-great-grandfather. It was instead Forey, and some slaveholders in Kentucky allowed enslaved people to have their own surname, and the Foreys were one of them. And the records verified, as I said, that Susan's parents and her brother, they were all enslaved by the Foreys. This is a picture of Dr. Erasmus Forey, who was a prominent physician here in Louisville and who was affiliated with one of the first medical schools in the city of Louisville. He became the administrator of his father's estate and had the final say in how the enslaved people were split up between him and his siblings. Well, I came to Jefferson County expecting I'd find more about Dr. Forey, but I didn't find it in the courthouse here in Louisville. But the people in that courthouse were very, very helpful. And they took time to tell me, you need to go to Frankfort. Go to Frankfort, stop at that Kentucky Archives, stop at the Kentucky Historical Society. They will have more information that will get you further on the journey. So first I went to the Kentucky Archives, and man, did I get lucky. They had exactly what I was looking for. I never got to the Kentucky Historical Society because everything I wanted about the Foreys was there at the Department of Libraries and Archives. The records there told me that Dr. Peter G. Forey's estate took more than a decade to settle because he had children by two wives. One wife died, he married again, and there were children in both sets of marriages who were minors. So it held up the administration of his estate. And the estate was separated in the Chancery Court of Louisville, and luckily those records were preserved in Frankfort. Those records detailed the names and the separation of my enslaved ancestral family. And this is one of the documents from that file in Frankfort. And it shows that Bob or Robert, my third great grandfather, is listed on here. Let's go back a slide. Right there, valued at $450. My third great grandmother, Winnie, is down here at the bottom. She was ill, so she wasn't valued in terms of dollars. We found Susan. She was given to Forey's sister, Lucretia Forey Holliday. And we also found my ancestor, Anderson, who was given to Dr. Forey's daughter, Eliza Forey Smith. Now, this next picture is me after I found those records, and I was in a state of shock. Because when you've done something like this so long, you're used to false starts and not finding what you're searching for. But there it all was laid out in front of me. And the guy at the archives happened to snap that picture. And I said, you know, that captured that moment excellently, because you can see on my face that I'm there, but I'm not really there. I'm lost in thoughts, and I'm trying to process all of this wonderful information that they've given me. Well, I didn't stop there. There was another place that I needed to come to find more in this story and to try to bring some closure to it. And that was right here at the Filson Historical Society. The resources here, ladies and gentlemen, for learning about Kentucky families, it's unequaled. And they have incredible staff that will help you, unlike some of the other places that I've been. And Ms. Hannah Costell, who I've mentioned to you previously, led me to the Filson's file on the Forey family. It told me all about them. It told me they were from France. They came to Virginia in the year 1700, and one of their descendants, Joseph Forey, left Virginia, came to Kentucky in the early 1800s, bringing enslaved people with him. And when he died, his son, Dr. Peter G. Forey, inherited some of those enslaved people. All that information was right here at the Filson. Well, Dr. Forey was a doctor, a medical doctor. He also had a plantation, and that's not a picture of it. That's just for illustration. The plantation was outside of Louisville, near a place called Anchorage, and the original house that he lived in is still there. And I visited that a few years ago. Turns out, though, it was even more interesting than that, because Dr. Forey turned out to be the fourth great-grandfather of President George W. Bush. Who would have known? I thought the Bushes were from Texas and Maine. I'd never heard of a connection to Kentucky. But sure enough, his family had been in Kentucky, had strong roots here, and a former staff person of the Filson named Nellie Oliver had done the research and put it all together in a newspaper article. The research was done, and it was right here at the Filson. Well, I decided, you know, I had such a good experience with Michael Robeson and the Brooks family that it was worth taking a chance to reach out to the Bush family, because Michael gave me records I wouldn't have found anywhere else, gave me a tour. He was wonderful. So I wrote to President Bush 3 times. Blew me off. I wrote to his brother, Jeb Bush, same non-response. His daughter, Jenna Bush Hager, said she's a young person. She's had people on her show like Dr. Henry Louis Gates, who does the show Finding Your Roots. Surely she'll help me. Not on your life. Blew me off. And I thought, well, try Laura Bush. She seems like a real intelligent, level-headed lady. But I guess by the time I reached out to her, the others had probably told her. So I didn't hear from her either. None of them was. So I thought, well, you know, maybe they think I'm making laws. Because when you are that famous and you have that kind of notoriety, you probably have millions of people trying to get your attention. And they might have even thought, well, you know, this guy says he wants information, but maybe he wants something more. Maybe he's some kind of kook. You know, maybe he's making all this up. So I reached out to a reporter from the biggest newspaper where I live, which is the Washington Post. And she was interested in the story, and she told me, well, you know, I'll try to reach out to them also. And we thought, okay, a voice as well-known as the Washington Post, that'll get their attention, and they'll realize I'm not just making all this stuff up. So she reached out to them, and she got the same response I got. They blew her off. So she wrote a story last summer, ended up on the front page of the newspaper the same day as the assassination attempt on President Trump, but it still got on the front page. And I really thought, you know, nobody's going to look at that article. Everybody's concerned about President Trump. You know, I'm an afterthought. But people did see it. And one of your board members here at the Filson saw it. And she reached out to me. And the response that I got from readers was amazing. And the Washington Post told me that story was the most read story on their website that day. Even more so than an assassination attempt on our president. Well, that should have gotten their attention, but it didn't. So, even though I haven't heard from the Bushes, and I really would like to hear from them, does it really matter? Because there's so many people like Michael that have been so good to me, and the people here in the Filson Historical Society, and I've learned more than I thought I ever would. So if I go to my grave and I never hear from them for whatever reason, I will rest easy. But I hope that I will hear from them, because when you search for your roots, it's not just about learning about your ancestors. It's about connecting with people. We find that we're connected to people in surprising ways. I never dreamed that my family had any connection to any of the Bushes, but there it is. We learn that our lives connect, and what was once hidden can bring us understanding. And what was once broken can be mended. The day has arrived when the sons and daughters of enslaved people can have supper with the people who are the descendants of those who enslaved them. Martin Luther King spoke of it years ago, and that time is now. So I say to all of you, start asking the questions. Start searching. Your journey may uncover more than just family. It may reveal to you how connected we all are as Americans. And before I close, I want to address the Bush family directly. Maybe they'll hear me this time. And I want to tell them, not only them, but for those that believe the past should be left unspoken, that I speak not just for myself, but for millions of African Americans throughout this country whose ancestors were enslaved, who seek acknowledgement and understanding today. And President and Mrs. Bush, I look to you as people of grace and dignity. But if you find yourselves uncertain about how to respond to this part of your ancestry, I urge you to seek out people who can help you. For example, I think of Michelle Obama, and I know you're good friends with her. She has shown grace and wisdom in the face of difficult conversations. Ask her, What does real leadership look like when confronting uncomfortable truths about race and slavery? Hey, ask Michael Robinson. He can tell you that it can be done, and it can be a positive experience for all of us. And to Jenna Bush Hager, I say to you that if you have doubts about my research, I invite you to ask Professor Henry Louis Gates, who's been on your show. Ask him to call me. I'll be glad to share the records, the documents, the well-documented paper trail that confirms our shared history. I'm not hiding. I welcome the conversation. And let me be clear, this is about shared history. It's about acknowledging that shared history that includes both slavery and freedom. It's about accepting the offer of friendship that's being extended to you in hopes that you will help all of us to bridge the racial divides that have caused so much pain in this country today and in the past. President George H.W. Bush called for a kinder, gentler America, and we all remember that. He spoke of a nation of compassion and unity and a commitment to the common good. He spoke also about kindness and gentleness, but those qualities require honesty. They require that we confront the past, not avoid it. Nelson Mandela once said, reconciliation means working together to correct the legacy of the past. And so to all of the Bush family, I say this, show the leadership and courage to face our past. As a direct descendant of enslaved people that your ancestors knew well, I represent millions of people. And when you give me the cold shoulder for whatever reason, you are doing so to every African American who descends from enslaved people in this country. It's not just about me. It's about acknowledging the humanity and dignity of all those voices that were silenced for generations. It's a call for the grace of reconciliation and recognition, or a demonstration of a willingness to chart a new path. None of us can change the past, but we can choose how we respond to its legacy. We can choose to see each other fully and to honor the struggles and triumphs that brought us to this very moment, and to resolve to walk forward together with respect and understanding. Time for silence is over. The time for honesty and courage is now. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate your attention.
We do have a few minutes for questions. If anyone has one, I'll bring the mic around.
This is not a question, this is a statement. I have attended a lot of lectures here, but not only was your material absolutely fascinating,
Thank you.
you're one of the best presenters we've
Oh.
ever had.
Thank you. That means more to me than I can say. Thank you, ma'am.
I have two questions. The
Yes,
first
sir.
is the various resources that you were able to find, some of the handwritten bills of sale and things like that.
Yes.
Did every institution or organization allow you to make photocopies or photograph those?
Well, here in Kentucky, they did. And the records that you're talking about, I found at the Kentucky Department of Libraries and Archives. And they allowed me to bring a digital camera in and to actually take a photograph of those documents. So they were wonderful. Some places won't let you do that.
Right.
They're afraid that if there's a flash, it could damage the record. And you can't blame them because they're trying to preserve things. But here in Kentucky, you're very blessed to have these kinds of institutions that make these things available.
So now the most obvious question, I think, is, have you considered writing a book about all of this?
Well, that's a good question. And I finally am at the point where I'm partially retired. So for the first time in my life, I've got more time for all of this. But I have another book on another part of my family, which was also from Kentucky, that I've spent decades working on. So once that's done, I would love to write about this. And if any of you have any connections to any publishers, let me know about them. I would certainly appreciate the contact. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Well, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a pleasure.